It was supposed to be just another ordinary Friday night. My parents had left for a weekend getaway and I was home alone. Being a teenager, I didn't mind the solitude. I had the whole house to myself, with the freedom to do whatever I pleased. As the evening settled in, I decided to order some pizza and binge-watch my favorite horror movies. The darkness outside only added to the thrill of the scares on the screen. Little did I know that the real horror was yet to come. Around midnight, as I was deep into the plot of a particularly terrifying movie, I heard a faint noise coming from upstairs. At first, I dismissed it as the house settling. But then it happened again. A distinct creak followed by what sounded like footsteps. My heart began to race, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. I paused the movie and strained my ears to listen. Silence. I convinced myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me and resumed watching, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me. But just as I started to relax, I heard it again. This time louder and closer. Someone, or something, was definitely upstairs. Panic surged through me as I realized I was not alone in the house. With trembling hands, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my voice barely above a whisper as I explained the situation to the operator. They assured me that help was on the way and instructed me to stay put and remain quiet. As I waited for the police to arrive, I could hear the intruder moving around upstairs, their footsteps growing louder and more erratic. Every creak of the floorboards sent a jolt of fear through me, and I prayed for the authorities to arrive soon. Minutes felt like hours as I huddled in the living room, clutching my phone tightly. Finally, the sound of sirens pierced the night, and relief flooded through me. I rushed to unlock the front door, ready to greet the officers and lead them to the intruder. But as I swung the door open, my heart sank. There was no one there. Confusion and fear gripped me as I stepped outside, scanning the empty street for any sign of the police. Had they gotten lost, or worse, had the intruder somehow managed to elude them? Just as I was about to go back inside and call 911 again, a voice spoke from behind me, sending a chill down my spine. "Looking for someone, kid?" I spun around to find a shadowy figure lurking in the darkness, their face obscured by a hooded jacket. My blood ran cold as I realized this was no ordinary intruder. It was someone who had been watching me all along. Before I could react, the figure lunged forward, grabbing me by the arm with surprising strength. I struggled to break free, but their grip was like iron, pulling me away from the safety of my home and into the night. Panic consumed me as I fought desperately against my captor, my mind racing with fear and uncertainty. Who were they? What did they want with me? And why had they waited until now to make their move? But as we disappeared into the darkness, one thing became painfully clear. I was not going to make it out of this alive. And as the echoes of my screams faded into the night, the true horror of being home alone washed over me like a tidal wave, drowning me in a sea of terror from which there was no escape. It was my first night in my new apartment, and I was filled with a mix of excitement and nerves. Moving to the big city had always been a dream of mine, and now that it was finally happening, I couldn't wait to start this new chapter of my life. As I unpacked my belongings and settled into my new space, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the place. Maybe it was the eerie silence that seemed to hang in the air, or the way the dimly lit hallway outside my door seemed to stretch on forever. But I brushed off my unease, chalking it up to nerves and the unfamiliarity of my surroundings. After all, moving to a new city was bound to come with its fair share of adjustment period, right? As night fell and the city outside my window came to life with the glow of streetlights and the distant hum of traffic, I tried to push aside my lingering unease and focus on getting some much-needed rest. But as I lay in bed, the silence of the apartment became suffocating, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards or the distant sound of voices echoing through the walls. Just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I heard it, a soft tapping coming from somewhere in the apartment. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but as the tapping grew louder and more persistent, I couldn't ignore it any longer. Heart pounding, I slipped out of bed and tiptoed through the darkness, following the sound to its source. To my surprise, it seemed to be coming from the apartment next door, apartment 13B. Curiosity getting the better of me, I pressed my ear against the thin wall. straining to hear what was happening on the other side. But all I could make out was the faint sound of whispering, like someone speaking in hushed tones just beyond my reach. Feeling a sense of unease creeping over me, I retreated back to my own apartment, trying to push aside the nagging feeling that something was very wrong about apartment 13B. But as the days turned into weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Everywhere I went, I felt the weight of someone's gaze on me, as if they were lurking just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And then, one night, it happened. I was jolted awake by the sound of screaming coming from apartment 13B. It was shrill and desperate, filled with terror and pain. Without thinking, I leaped out of bed and rushed to the door, heart pounding in my chest as I fumbled with the lock. But before I could reach the hallway, the screaming abruptly stopped, leaving behind an eerie silence that hung heavy in the air. Fear gripped me as I hesitated in the doorway, unsure of what to do next. Should I call the police, knock on the door and check if everything was okay? Or should I stay put and pretend I hadn't heard anything at all? But before I could make up my mind, a voice spoke from behind me, sending a chill down my spine. "Did you hear that too?" I spun around to find my neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, standing in the hallway, her face pale and drawn with fear. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice trembling as I struggled to keep my composure. "It's apartment 13B, she whispered, her eyes wide with terror. "Strange things have been happening there ever since the new tenants moved in." My blood ran cold as I listened to her story. Tales of strange noises in the dead of night, shadowy figures lurking in the hallways, and a pervasive sense of dread that seemed to hang over the entire building like a dark cloud. As Mrs. Jenkins spoke, a sense of unease settled over me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something sinister lurking just beyond the walls of my own apartment. But before I could dwell on it any longer, a loud banging echoed through the hallway, causing us both to jump in fright. It was coming from apartment 13B. Heart pounding, I followed Mrs. Jenkins to the door, our hands trembling as we reached out to knock. But before our knuckles could make contact, the door swung open on its own, revealing a scene straight out of a nightmare. The apartment was bathed in darkness, illuminated only by the flickering glow of candlelight. Strange symbols adorned the walls, drawn in what looked like blood, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. And in the center of it all stood a figure shrouded in shadow, their eyes burning with an otherworldly light as they stared back at us with a malevolent gaze. Fear clenched my heart as I realized the truth. Apartment 13B was not just haunted, it was cursed. And now, it seemed, its dark secrets were about to be unleashed upon the unsuspecting world. With a sense of dread sinking like a stone in my stomach, I realized that I was in way over my head. And as the figure in the darkness took a step forward, a cold chill ran down my spine, leaving me paralyzed with fear. For in that moment, I knew that the horror of apartment 13B was only just beginning, and that no one, not even me, was safe from its sinister grasp. It all started on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I had just moved into a cozy little house on the outskirts of town, eager to start fresh in a new neighborhood. The sun was shining, birds were chirping, and everything seemed perfect. But as I settled into my new home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The house next door, a quaint little cottage with a well-kept garden, seemed strangely deserted. I hadn't seen any signs of life since I arrived. No lights in the windows, no cars in the driveway, nothing. At first, I brushed it off as my imagination getting the best of me. After all, people lead busy lives, right? Maybe my neighbors were just out of town or keeping to themselves. But as the days turned into weeks, my curiosity got the better of me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right about the house next door. So one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness settled over the neighborhood, I decided to investigate. Stepping out into the cool night air, I made my way over to the neighboring house, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. The front door was slightly ajar, creaking softly on its hinges as I pushed it open and stepped inside. The air inside was stale and musty, with a layer of dust coating every surface. It was clear that no one had been here in quite some time. But as I ventured further into the house, a sense of unease settled over me, like I was being watched from the shadows. Ignoring the voice of reason in the back of my mind, I pressed on, determined to uncover the mystery of the abandoned house next door. Room by room, I searched for any clue that might shed light on what had happened to its occupants. But just as I was about to give up hope, I stumbled upon something that sent a chill down my spine. A hidden staircase leading down into the darkness below. Heart pounding, I hesitated at the top of the stairs, unsure of what I might find lurking in the depths below. But curiosity got the better of me, and with a deep breath, I descended into the darkness, my footsteps echoing on the cold, stone steps. As I reached the bottom, I found myself in a dimly lit basement, filled with rows of shelves stacked high with boxes and crates. Dusty cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. But what caught my eye was a series of strange symbols etched into the walls, glowing faintly in the dim light. They looked ancient, almost mystical, like something out of a horror movie. As I approached the symbols, a sudden sense of dread washed over me, like I had stumbled upon something forbidden, something that should have remained hidden from prying eyes. But before I could make sense of it all, a sound echoed through the darkness. A soft, sinister whisper that sent shivers down my spine. "Who's there?" I spun around to find myself face to face with a figure emerging from the shadows, a tall, gaunt man with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. He was dressed in tattered rags, his skin pale and translucent in the dim light. Fear gripped me as I stumbled backward, my heart racing in my chest. Who was this man? And what was he doing in this abandoned basement? But before I could find the words to speak, the man lunged forward, his hands reaching out to grab me. With a cry of terror, I turned and ran, scrambling up the stairs as fast as my legs would carry me. Behind me, I could hear the man's laughter echoing through the darkness, taunting me as I fled into the night. But I didn't stop running until I was safely back inside my own home, the door locked tight behind me. For days afterward, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the man from the basement was still out there somewhere, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. But as the weeks turned into months, life returned to normal, and I began to convince myself that it had all been a figment of my imagination, a trick of the mind brought on by the stress of moving to a new place. That is, until one fateful night, when a news report caught my eye, a report of a mysterious disappearance in the neighborhood, a disappearance that bore an eerie resemblance to the events that had unfolded in the abandoned house next door. And as I watched the images flicker across the screen, a cold chill ran down my spine, and I realized with a sinking feeling that the man from the basement was still out there, his sinister smile haunting my nightmares, waiting for the next unsuspecting victim to cross his path. It was just another ordinary day in my cozy apartment. The sun was shining through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the room as I went about my usual routine. But little did I know, this day would be anything but ordinary. As I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing my teeth and getting ready for work, I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow, fleeting and elusive, dancing across the glass. At first I brushed it off as a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination brought on by the early morning haze. But as I turned to get a better look, the shadow vanished, leaving me feeling unsettled and on edge. Shaking off the strange feeling, I finished getting ready and headed out the door, eager to put the bizarre encounter behind me. But as the day wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone, or something, was lurking just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That night, as I lay in bed, the events of the day replayed in my mind, filling me with a sense of unease. And then, just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I heard it. A soft tapping coming from somewhere in the darkness. Heart pounding, I sat up in bed and listened, straining to hear any sign of movement in the silence of the night. But all I could hear was the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat, echoing in my ears like a drumbeat. Just as I was about to convince myself that it was all just my imagination, I heard it again. The tapping, louder this time, more insistent, and then, a voice whispered from the shadows, "Let me in." I froze, my blood running cold as I realized that the voice was coming from the bathroom, the same bathroom where I had seen the shadow in the mirror earlier that day. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone, ready to call the police, but as I dialed the number, a sense of dread washed over me, like a cold hand closing around my throat. What if whatever was in the bathroom wasn't human? What if it was something far more sinister, something that defied explanation? But before I could make up my mind, a loud crash echoed through the apartment, followed by the sound of shattering glass. With a cry of fear, I leaped out of bed and rushed to investigate, my heart pounding in my chest as I braced myself for whatever horrors awaited me on the other side of the bathroom door. But as I flung open the door and stepped inside, what I saw stopped me dead in my tracks. A figure, tall and shadowy, standing in front of the shattered remains of the mirror, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. Fear gripped me as I stared into those empty eyes, unable to move, unable to speak. And then, without warning, the figure lunged forward, its hand outstretched, reaching for me with claws like daggers. With a scream of terror, I turned and ran, the sound of my own footsteps echoing in my ears as I fled into the night, leaving behind the apartment and the horrors that lurked within it, forever. But as I stumbled out into the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow in the mirror was still out there, waiting for its next victim, its hunger for fear and despair insatiable, its presence lurking just beyond the edge of our reality, ready to strike when we least expect it.